Now this is the story of the 12 spies. It's coming from Numbers 13 and 14. The Lord told Moses to select a leader from each of the 12 tribes and to send 12 spies throughout the land to explore the land that the Lord had promised them. They were to see if the land was a good land or a bad land, to see what the inhabitants of the land were like. Were they few or many? Were they weak or strong? And what were the cities like? Were they walled? And so the spies went throughout the land, and they came back after 40 days, and they were carrying a branch that they had cut down that had such a large cluster of grapes on it that it had to be carried by 2 men on a pole. And they also had pomegranates and they had figs. And they gave a testimony to the community saying that the land was, in fact, a land flowing with milk and honey, but that the inhabitants of the land were powerful and the cities in the land were fortified with walls. Now, Caleb, he said, we should go into the land and we should take possession of it. But the other spies, they brought a bad report saying that the land would devour them, and that by comparison to the inhabitants of the land, they were like grasshoppers, and they looked like grasshoppers to the inhabitants. And when the people heard this, they cried and they grumbled and complained against Moses and Aaron, and they said, why, is the Lord leading us in the land just to put us to death by the sword? Well, we would have been better off dying in Egypt or dying in this desert than going into the land and having our wives and children taken as plunder in battle. And so Moses and Aaron, they fell on their faces, and Jacob and Joshua and Caleb, they said, if the Lord is pleased with us, he will give us the land. Now don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the inhabitants of the land. The Lord is with us, and he'll give us the land. Now, the people, they picked up stones to stone Joshua and Caleb, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and spoke with Moses at the tent of meeting, and he said, these people are showing me contempt. Even though I have performed many miraculous signs among them, now I'm going to destroy them, and I'll make you, Moses, into a great nation. But Moses said, Lord, what will the Egyptians say, and what will the inhabitants of the land say? They know that you delivered Israel out of Egypt, and that you've been leading them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, the inhabitants of these other nations, they'll say that you were not able to bring your people into the land, and that's why you destroyed them in the desert. Now, according to your great love, Lord, forgive these people as you've been forgiving them all along, ever since they came out of Egypt. And the Lord said, I have forgiven them, Moses, but not one of this generation that has grumbled and complained against me will enter the promised land. They said their children would be taken as plunder. Their children will go into the land, and they will enjoy what their parents despised. But not one of them will enter the land. They'll wander around in the desert for 40 years and die in the desert. And then the Lord, he brought a plague down on the 10 who had brought the bad report and had stirred up the rebellion, and they died. And when Moses told the people this, then the people said, we have sinned, and we're now ready to go into the land and take possession of it. But Moses said, you can't go into the land. You'll be crushed. You have abandoned the Lord, and he has abandoned you. But even though Moses stayed in the camp and the Ark of the Covenant didn't go with them, they went up into the hills to take possession of the land. But the people of the hill country, they came down and they attacked the Israelites and they drove them back. And this is the story of the 12 spies coming from Numbers 13 and 14.